Let's start from afar. Those who are younger than 30 years could hardly imagine the situation when the prestigious National League is in full swing, but there are no full broadcasts of games for weeks. All you can get in relation to a specific site is short highlights about 1 minute long. The truth is that in the mid 1980s, club football was some kind of orphan who has been basically subjugated by the national team's industry. This is hard to believe, but in that era, even Juventus, Inter, and AS Roma, three best Italian teams of that period, have been broadcasted just 4-5 times each per season, including reviews in the form of extended up to 40-50 minutes highlights if we are talking about the Serie A. As for the other football-obsessed countries, Germany, England and Spain, the picture was even worse. The club football back at that time has been a desired guest on TV solely in the case of European Cups, but those games and nights were a relative rarity. On top of that, only several sides represented there, even the biggest leagues, and in 1986 AC Milan was not among them. Berlusconi, who bought the club with the glorious but distant past that marred both in sporting and financial crisis, instantly realized that television should be a major weapon in popularizing his brainchild. The fact that by the mid-1980s the Italian mogul was easily one of the richest and most influential people not only of his native country but in the whole Europe facilitated his task. Moreover, by the time, the inventive Silvio had in his possession a countrywide network of TV stations, an effective Italian commercial TV empire. In the early stages, he has been forced to act rather obliquely, though, given that all the broadcasting rights to Serie A were reserved for Rai for many seasons to come. The situation with the rights to display European Cups was more flexible and therefore more favorable. Berlusconi and subordinated to him Canale 5 and Italia Uno or Mediaset could still, metaphorically indeed, some games on occasion on that front in order to broadcast them. Under these circumstances, the short-term and mainly just launched competitions, the Italian Super Cup, the Intercontinental Cup and the European Super Cup, turned into a real find for the AC Milan owner. Broadcasting these games on air, he on one side propagandized his club and increased the amount of football on TV, and on the other one put some pressure on competitors from Rai to display Serie A games more often. Along with the undeniable sporting success of AC Milan, it gradually increased the number of football simulcasts by the early 1990s, and after that, with the globalization, this process started to grow exponentially, eventually transforming itself into the picture we all used to see when every match of top clubs is available to watch, even if it is not always for free. For sure, it was an objective phenomenon, but it's equally true that Berlusconi played a pivotal role in it, and if you want to thank somebody specifically for the abundance of the number one spot on the all sort of screens, it definitely must be him. Taking care about the quantity, the quick-witted Silvio did so even more in terms of the quality. Rapidly tasting the major success on the international level, he immediately realized the pluses of this particular format and how much glory, recognition and the laurels it brings. At the same time, the Italian wasn't impressed at all with the regulation of the Champions Cup. He has been pretty much irritated by the blind draw and especially by the fact that only the current champions of their respective countries, plus the actual winner of the tournament, had an access to the competition. Knowing how stiff and riveting is the battle for the Scudetto in the Serie A, he understood that even AC Milan, with its gorgeous football, first-class players and truly unique resources, couldn't participate in the Champions Cup year after year. Trying to change it, Berlusconi promptly came to an idea of the Super League, the indoor tournament where all major continental sides have a fixed place, and started to push UEFA pretty hard in the late 1980s by joining forces with some other prominent club bosses. Then Real Madrid president Ramon Mendoza was the most influential of them. This activity provoked the change of the tournament's format. In 1991, the group stage has been introduced, and a year later, the competition itself has been rebranded into the Champions League. Il Cavaliere, as he was commonly called in Italy, also participated in the further expansion of the tournament in 1997 and 1999, but in a less direct fashion. By that time, so many club officials were interested in the enhancing of competition that there was no need for Berlusconi to be in the front line. The ex-AC Milan owner had been the godfather of modern club football in many ways, and especially in his attention to small details. The innate perfectionist, Silvio was convinced that there are no trifles in such serious business which football actually is. It would be no exaggeration to say that he was making available to the players all the best, starting from the magnificent training center in the form of Milanella, which became a standard of excellence among its peers for more than a decade, and ending with luxurious hotels. One funny but pretty significant case. In the 1980s, the fans of Napoli used to prevent players of visiting team from sleeping by singing loudly and intrusively at nights in front of a hotel. But on May 1st, 1988, right on the eve of the memorable decisive match against AC Milan, the usual trick suddenly failed. Why? Simply because the prudent and generous Berlusconi booked for his team one of the upper floors of Hotel Skyscraper. Hence, the precious sleep of Ruud Gullit and company has been reliably saved, and it was definitely not the least component of the eventual win. AC Milan of that era have been the benchmark for the rivals also in terms of scouting, having excellent specialists in Adriano Galliani, the long-term chief executive officer and vice president of the club, and Arietta Braida, who was in charge of transfers for decades. The club owner brought to a new level of thoroughness and commitment the whole system of selection players. Before buying a footballer, especially the expensive one, the representatives of the Rossoneri used to comprehensively assess all the aspects of his individuality and life, character, habits, environment, family, and so on. For instance, in the case of Andrei Shevchenko, the whole process of tracking took about 3 years, but it was worth it, as we all know. Nowadays, this kind of approach is an absolute norm, but in the late 1980s and over the course of the 1990s, it was a breakthrough in professionalism. The levels of nutrition and medicine overall at Milanella were also groundbreaking for that period. As a result, in a time when most high-profile players used to finish their careers being in the early 30s, Franco Baresi, Mauro Tassotti, and Roberto Donadoni hung up their boots at the venerable age of 37. As for the younger Alessandro Costacurta and Paolo Maldini, they went even further, serving to the club on the pitch until their 40s. Berlusconi certainly wasn't the first rich and high-ranking man who ran top football club. We could recall the names of Santiago Bernabeu and Andrea Agnelli, but he definitely has been a pioneer in another respect, whilst his older compatriot Agnelli, the other charismatic and senior man with seemingly unlimited political and economic leverage, was content to be successful in football with its classic environment. The ever-ambitious Silvio was relentlessly trying to establish the new rules. It was him who slowly but surely pressed for the increase of vacancies for foreign players at first, and then in 1996, subtly using the infamous Bosman case, he secured the effective abolition of this limitation. It was him who proved in the late 1980s that a club could have a better roster than any elite national team in the time when the latter had an initial huge edge precisely because of those limitations. Berlusconi was also the first one among his peers who came up with the idea of having 20 plus quality footballers within a team, and in 1992, at the instigation of Fabio Capello, he realized it in practice by adding to the already formidable squad Jean-Pierre Papin, Gianluigi Lentini, Dejan Savicevic, Zvonimir Boban, Stefano Iranio, and Fernando Di Napoli. In the last 25 years or so, each truly ambitious club is building exactly this way, but back at the era when it was more than enough to have 14-15 classy footballers, this was a revolutionary approach. Berlusconi brilliantly foresaw the evolution of football, which was getting faster with the ever-increasing number of games, and the reason that he needs more capable players in order to stay at the top. In order to achieve this goal, he needed to spend big either, and it would be accurate to say that the ultra-competitive Italian brought in football huge money both explicitly and implicitly, by routinely signing paychecks with his own hands and by forcing his adversaries to do the same in order to stay in the battle for supremacy. Berlusconi has been also unparalleled in shrewdness when it comes to the selection of head coaches. Both Arrigo Sacchi and Fabio Capello arrived to San Siro with zero experience in Serie A in this capacity. As for Carlo Ancelotti, he, on the contrary, by 2001 had a well-established negative reputation of a nice loser who is unable to win silverware even with the great squads. In the meantime, Massimiliano Allegri, by 2010, despite his decent work at Cagliari, also didn't seem an obvious and winning bet, but the sagacious Il Cavaliere used to pay more attention to individual traits and qualities than to track records, and it was undoubtedly his strength. The other Berlusconi's hallmark was his love for the beautiful, women first of all. This passion burned inside of him so brightly that even at the advancing age, up to 85, he wasn't shy at all being in the company of attractive ladies who were 50 plus years younger than him. It would be fair to say that he treated football in the same way. Win and entertain was his favorite motto. In this sense, he has been an absolute antipode of those numerous presidents of Serie A clubs who thought that the final score is the only important thing and everything else is rubbish, just because it would be completely forgotten on the very next day. In a way, they were right. You will recall that with the measly amount of football on TV in the 1970s and during most of the 1980s, the public had no opportunity to evaluate the spectacle itself. On the contrary, Berlusconi's brand new attitude coincided with the dawn of new media era and underlined the importance of aesthetics. It took an attacking and free-flowing football in order to prompt RAI and other channels to broadcast full games and persuade the viewers to spend 90 minutes at least behind the screens, and AC Milan of that era were the best promoter of this idea. Berlusconi's quest for perfection and elegant football was going so far that he was fond of saying that win with an ugly and dull play is only half a win for him. That's why he flatly refused to challenge in court the legality of Marseille triumph in the Champions League in 1993 after the well-documented Glassman's case, and that's why he wasn't content at all with the pretty successful results-wise 1993-1994 campaign when Capella's side stamped low-scoring affairs amid the catastrophic deficit of goals. The Italian also constantly patronized the players with flair, imagination and splendid technique. For exactly this reason, he brought to San Siro Paolo Futri and Ronaldo, despite the fact that both well past their peak, and back up the petulant Dejan Savicevic in his swordplay with the ever-pedantic Capella. Silvio also wasn't shy at all to express his desire to see at least 3 distinct attacking footballers in the AC Milan starting lineup, and sequentially openly scolded those managers who were not in a hurry to fulfill his wish. The irony is that Berlusconi faced the first deep crisis in 1996, when he apparently achieved his goal with the abolition of free foreigners on the pitch rule. The school of thought back then was that AC Milan, with its seemingly unbridled political and financial assets, will completely turn into the omnipotent side, but in reality the experts couldn't be more wrong. The absolute freedom of choice has led to utter chaos, and against the background spate of stars from abroad, AC Milan visibly lost its identity and famous family atmosphere. In the situation where the team roster has been overloaded by the marquee players, the proverbial clash of egos was inevitable, especially we recall that by that time Berlusconi has been consumed by his political activities and seldom visited Milanella. Barring an unexpected and to a certain extent lucky Scudetto in 1999, the club and its mighty boss fully adapted to the new mode only by 2002, when the new winning cycle has been started under the calm guidance of Ancelotti, but been pretty much comparable with the predecessors in terms of international accolades and stability. This version of AC Milan has been perceived differently. Unlike the golden period in the late 1980s and in the first half of 1990s, in the 2000s, the Rossoneri weren't the club with the unmatched financial strength and advanced tactical ideas. That AC Milan were rather a part of a elite tier that consisted of 7-8 equally ambitious sides, and the difference was that Berlusconi's outfit took its chances better and on a more consistent basis. The Italian himself also drastically changed. He became much less generous, especially amid the likes of Florentino Perez and Roman Abramovich. The truth is that Silvio didn't want to keep the pace in the financial race anymore, and by the mid-2000s was tend to boast about his status of the all-time most decorated football club president and remarkable competency among his peers, than show off the amount of investments. As you can see, by that point he willingly left the transfer records to the younger and hungrier adversaries. This big swing in the mindset of Berlusconi is generally attributed to his age and the satiety of winning, and it's partly true. But even more so, he was tired of losing money. The reality is that during his long tenure, the Italian permanently operated at a loss in spite of all the glitter, satisfaction, glory, and additional popularity and credibility that football and AC Milan gave to him during those 2 decades. The problem was that the business model of Berlusconi in relation to football simply didn't exist as such. It was literally the pure philanthropy all the way. Let's start with the fact that AC Milan didn't have its own stadium, bearing in mind that San Siro to this day is owned by the city. Hence, the club couldn't make big money on ticket sales even in the heydays, when in the early 1990s season tickets were sold like hotcakes. It must be added that Berlusconi used to promote his own companies, placing their logos on the team's shirts, so AC Milan gained not much even on that front. As for the sale of merchandise in the 1990s and 2000s, with a relatively weak internet, it didn't and couldn't give enough profit. It may sound ridiculous, but in the early 1990s, the club used to make solid money on numerous away-friendly and testimonial games, but obviously it wasn't not near enough to cover the expenses of the whole project. In the meantime, the maintenance of top club required more and more money in order to comply with the new conditions and demands. In the mid-2000s, each season on top level started to cost Berlusconi a 9-digit amount in euros, and it was too much even for him. The fund struck in 2010. If the cancellation of restrictions on foreign players mixed all the cards for the Italian for years, the inception of financial fair play turned into the kiss of death for him. In the situation that the clubs were forbidden to spend more than they earn in the natural way, AC Milan, with its modest revenues, couldn't afford to have top players anymore. Over the next 2 years, Berlusconi and Galliani have hoped that the team will win the Champions League and therefore get a huge amount of prize money, but it wasn't to be, and the summer of 2012 marked the beginning of a new era, or rather the beginning of an agony. After the forced sale of Zlatan Ibrahimovic and Thiago Silva to PSG and the mass exodus of famous veterans headed by Clarence Seedorf, Gennaro Gattuso and Alessandro Nesta, AC Milan turned into an average team with a subpar roster, heavily limited budgets, and very slim, almost non-existent chances for a better future. The ever-optimistic Il Cavaliere didn't hide his extreme disappointment. In the following 5 years, almost all his interviews have been one way or another dedicated to this team. He time after time lamented that under the new regulations, the club is doomed to be uncompetitive on a high level and in parallel tried to sell it. The sad irony is that from a business perspective, it was the worst possible moment, but the truth is that in the 2.5 decades of prosperity, Berlusconi didn't even consider parting with his treasure. Anyhow, on 13 April 2017, he sold Milan to Rossoneri Sport Investment Lux after protracted negotiations for a total of 830 million euros. At last, he gained some financial profit from the club. The final years of Berlusconi in football, unlike the politics, went in the relative oblivion. In order to stay around the sport, he bought Monza right before his 82nd birthday in 2018, and within 4 years propelled the inconspicuous club from the Serie C to the Serie A. Very good achievement, especially if we recall that the team has never reached the top flight before just hanging around in Serie B for 40 years in total, but probably not for a man who used to be a protagonist being on top of the world. Il Cavaliere lived to see his side's promising debut in the elite echelon of Italian football, and discovered another gifted head coach in the young Raffaele Palladino. Berlusconi also promised fans the Champions League, Scudetto, and who knows, even more impressive triumphs, but it didn't come true in his own lifetime. However, let's finish on a positive note. It would be very much appropriate for the story about a man who, among other things, was well known for his upbeat mood. A man whose last girlfriend was young enough to be his great-granddaughter. A man who always dreamt and thought big. A man who arrived to a hospital for the last time with the words, "I would continue to work even there." Perhaps exactly this attitude, along with some other talents indeed, made him the figure that defined the previous era in football and largely determined the next one, the one we are experiencing right now.